Thanks to Private Internet Access VPN for sponsoring this video. This is the story about how I ended up with this awesome ground effects vehicle that can autonomously control its altitude above water and navigate through GPS waypoints all on its own. This project started back when I built a little foam board e-chronoplan and mounted a LiDAR distance sensor to the bottom to help keep it as low to the ground as possible. The ArduPilot flight controller on board is running some custom code that adds PID control loops to the throttle, elevator, and flaperons to actively control height based on the LiDAR reading. The next goal for this project is to add some more custom code that allows it to run autonomous waypoint missions while in the ground effect. A few months ago, I threw this idea out there in another one of my videos, and quite a lot of people seemed excited about it. Then, Kevin from the YouTube channel ThinkFlight reached out and offered to build a custom amphibious ground effects vehicle for Sebastian and I to use for this project. Kevin just happens to be a master aircraft designer and builder, and he's also the guy that designed the popular Nano Goblin, which I can honestly say is my new favorite FPV wing. With skills like that, I was happy to collaborate. So Kevin got to work on the airframe, and Sebastian and I got to work on the flight controller and distance sensors. 6 months later, this is what we ended up with.
ThinkFlight that make it happen. Kevin, Daniel, and Sebastian built an RCG EV from scratch. They made the magic happen. XFLR5, EPP and hot knife. Core dominated ground effect helps this airframe fly. Kevin made it stable. Kevin made it good. It's flying on the water just the way it should. ThinkFlight, high quality autonomous ground effect vehicle, flying so low, it's unreal. Efficiency is up, power consumption is down when you're only flying 1 inch off the ground. Yeah. Sebastian's custom code, written by a pro, custom build of ArduPilot, got this plane flying low. Testing, endless testing, these boys are never resting. Software's glitching, bugs they're fixing, so much time they are investing. Strong little motors spinning fast, making weight, nose down, descent, throttle back, skim the lake. GPS waypoints defined so precisely, super fast, stabilized, hyperlapse, AC. High quality autonomous ground effect vehicle, flying so low, it's unreal. Efficiency is up, power consumption is down when you're only flying 1 inch off the ground.
Well, that was pretty neat, wasn't it? Yep, so now let's rewind back to the beginning and talk about the journey that it took to get here. This video is sponsored by Private Internet Access VPN. PIA VPN is the most transparent VPN provider on the market with a fully open source software and over 30 million downloads. They never record or store user data, and their no logs policy has been proven multiple times in court. PIA changes your IP address and reroutes your internet traffic through an encrypted tunnel. Their service hides your online activity from your network administrator, online service provider, or government censors. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is open the app and click connect. I use PIA VPN to access shows on Netflix or other streaming services that are otherwise blocked in my country. I love how it safeguards my online privacy by blocking trackers, malicious websites, and ads. PIA is available for all platforms including iOS, macOS, Windows, and Linux. Use my link in the video description to support my channel and get PIA VPN for less than $3 a month, and 2 extra months for free. That means it's actually only $2.08 a month. Thanks to PIA VPN for sponsoring this video. Now back to the project. If you want to see more on the design and build process, go check out Kevin's video about the project on his YouTube channel, ThinkFlight. The majority of the airframe is made out of EPP foam covered in Kevlar and goop, which is a type of rubbery glue. It's mixed with toluene to help thin it out before applying it to the Kevlar. The benefits of using goop and toluene instead of normal epoxy resin is that it's much more impact resistant and even a little bit flexible, but it still adds a lot of structural stiffness to the foam. Pretty cool. The wingspan of the aircraft is 6 feet and it weighs 8.5 pounds. It runs on a 6S2P 2170 lithium-ion pack that powers two little T-motor F90 1500 kV motors with 7-inch props. After Cavan did some flying of his own, he drove it up from LA and I came down from Seattle to meet at some random parking lot in Portland for the handoff. After that, Sebastian and I started experimenting with distance sensors, since I wasn't sure if the little LiDAR chips that we had previously been using would work over water. Turns out they do work, but the range is too small for our new, larger aircraft. They are also really hard to waterproof, since a lot of the clear plastics and tape that I tried actually block infrared light. We tried hooking up a sonar module and got it working with ArduPilot, but those are also really hard to waterproof because it's basically just a little speaker and a microphone. They also have a lot of noise in the signal, so we ended up switching back to LiDAR, but this time a more powerful version. This is the TF Mini Plus rangefinder module, and it ended up working pretty well for us. I also installed the new DragonLink 900 MHz system for long-range RC control and live telemetry data transmission. On this build, we're using a Cube Black flight controller. I spent the first few flights tuning the flight controller and making sure it worked as expected. I was super impressed with how well this thing flew. It's really stable, and the glide ratio is incredibly efficient for this type of a plane. In calm winds and flat water, it was pretty easy to keep in the ground effect without any LiDAR assistance, but it definitely requires some precision piloting. One thing Cavan explained to me was that as an aircraft enters the ground effect, the center of pressure shifts backwards. This effectively makes the plane more nose-heavy, which then makes it want to nose down and run into the ground. This tendency is mostly counteracted by the increase in lift you get while close to the ground. But still, the optimum ground effect vehicle design would have as little of a center of pressure shift as possible, and that was one of Cavan's design goals for this airframe. Compared to other designs like the Airfish, the center of pressure shift is minimal. Despite the whole center of pressure shift problem, most aircraft are able to stay in the ground effect by themselves if the throttle is set to the perfect position and there is no wind or turbulence. This is rarely ever the case, so the next move was for Sebastian and I to install the LiDAR and tune the control loop. After a fair amount of trial and error, we got it working pretty well, but the system was still a bit over-tuned, as you can see here. It's interesting how the airspeed and rangefinder altitude kinda oscillate together, but slightly out of phase. Pretty cool. After some more PID tuning, we got it working quite a bit better, and I was able to just steer it around like an RC car on cruise control. No elevator or throttle input needed. Pretty sweet. After that, it was time to make it autonomous. We didn't want to risk the new airframe with untested code, and luckily, the little foamboard Econo was just barely hanging in there after a lot of abuse. I installed a little GPS on it and went out to the park for some testing. Before testing our new fancy ground effect waypoints, I did a normal waypoint mission to make sure the GPS was working okay. Watching this thing fly itself in auto mode was pretty adorable. We also had to verify the LiDAR worked over grass, so I did a quick flight in manual ground effect mode, and it seemed to work pretty well. Then it was time to test auto ground effect mode. This did not go very well at first. After several crashes, we had a smashed nose and a broken wing spar, and the thing was just barely able to stay in the air.
Oh, it's got a flappy wing now.
We were just about ready to call it quits, but I decided to do one last flight, and miraculously, it worked.
Holy shit, it's working.
This might not look like much, but it successfully flew between two ground effect waypoints all by itself, shortly before taking a turn too wide and hitting the grass.
And it crashed. It worked! It totally worked! It just ran a little bit too wide on that corner and hit the tall grass. That's awesome. With the wings about to fold in half the entire time. That's hilarious.
That was good enough for us, so we uploaded the new firmware onto the Big Bird and set out to the lake again. Right off the bat, it seemed to work pretty well. With this mission here, the vehicle would be in the ground effect on a segment, but then climb up to 10 meters for the rest of it. I was too scared of turning while in the ground effect because we would likely strike a wingtip and crash. Next I tried some gradual turns, but it still hit the ground once or twice, which was a bit sketchy considering that the plane was flying itself. After that, I took a break from the autonomous stuff and stuck a DJI FPV system on board. Before installing it, I drenched the whole thing in conformal coating. Banji seemed to like it.
Oh, that's
real time and it's spooky.
Now it's in ground effect mode, so I'm just hands off the controller and it just stays at that altitude.
That's crazy. Wait, so you're using the sensors to do ground effect right now?
Yep.
So the LiDAR works over choppy water as well?
It seems to, yeah.
That's awesome. All right, well that's enough for me. Very interesting experience.
Oh, there's a big spider on it.
After doing a few more FPV flights, I started having the video cut out randomly and not come back. This was quite terrifying, especially while low to the ground, but luckily I had a return to home switch set up on the radio. After that, I switched over to a full-size air unit, and that had much better range and didn't randomly cut out. I was able to fly 3 miles away, clear to the other side of the lake with decent video the whole way. Pretty impressive. I don't think I would get good video quality from that far away while in the ground effect, but from within a mile away it seems to work fine. Okay, now back to the autonomous stuff. In order to prevent the vehicle from striking a wingtip during turns, Sebastian made a new type of waypoint that increased the altitude set point to 2 times whatever it normally was while in ground effect.
You want. Oh. Oh, wow. That hit the water. Oh, there's another turn. Oh, it gets really low on the turns.
I tested this out with a big circular waypoint mission, and it seemed to work fine at first, but then at one point it started acting funky and hit the ground. Luckily, a guy on a paddleboard saw the crash and brought it back to shore. The rescue wasn't going super well for him, so he ended up wrapping the leash around it and towing it back. Pretty awesome. Thanks, random guy. The next day, I set out to try and measure and compare efficiency in and out of ground effect. I basically designed a waypoint mission where it would fly a rectangle pattern and alternate between ground effect and 10 meters of altitude. This would repeat over and over until I felt like I had enough data. After the flight, Sebastian crunched the numbers in MATLAB, and this is what we got. The big squares are the averages. Out of ground effect, it flew faster and drew more current, and in ground effect, it flew slower but drew less current. Even though this might look like grade A science at first, we actually can't draw any conclusions about efficiency from this data. The problem is that while the plane is high up, the flight controller is trying to maintain a certain airspeed. But while in ground effect, the airspeed just kinda does what it does, based on throttle and pitch, and that is ultimately determined by the LiDAR input. In order to accurately compare efficiency in and out of ground effect, we would need to keep the airspeed consistent in both modes and compare power consumption. Alternatively, we could keep the power consistent and look at airspeed. Anyways, that could be a good test for a future video. One thing we can do is estimate the theoretical efficiency increase based on data from the old aerospace textbooks. This graph shows that for an airplane of this size, flying 24 inches high will result in a 10% power reduction, and flying 6 inches high will result in a 32% power reduction. Pretty cool. Next up, I planned out some long-range autonomous flights, and in the process, realized that flying super far away while really low was not a really safe thing to do. It would really suck to lose radio range and then have the thing run into a boat. Maybe I'll try some longer range ground effect missions in the winter when the lake is empty and the water is calmer. But for now, I planned the missions so that the aircraft stays in ground effect for the first mile or so, and then goes up higher for the rest of the real long-range portion. Then, as it's coming back, it would go back down into ground effect. I ended up doing this with most of the long-range ground effect flights I did with this aircraft, just to be safe. I still wanted to try a long-range mission low to the water, and luckily, Ted here was nice enough to take us out on his boat. I programmed in a big mission around Lake Washington that was nearly 7.5 miles total. Unfortunately, the morning we chose was pretty windy with really rough water. This ended up being an issue for the rangefinder, as you'll see in a bit. Once in auto mode, the plane was not staying as low as it normally would with smoother water. I was manually having to hold a little bit of down elevator to get it to stay lower. Despite this, we were still able to get some pretty sweet hyperlapse shots. After that, we went to the downwind side of the bridge, where the water was calmer. Here we did some manual ground effect flights with the Insta360 X2 on board. Later on, Ted took a look at the data and made these two graphs. They show the rangefinder readings in rough water and medium bumpy water. You can clearly see how there's a ton more noise in rough water. Not ideal. This is probably why the plane wasn't staying as low as it should have. In perfectly calm water, the rangefinder has no noise at all. The line is totally smooth. This all makes total sense, because the LiDAR beam just reflects in different directions off waves and doesn't make it back to the sensor. Dealing with poor rangefinder data was nothing new. Early on, we were having a problem where the aircraft wouldn't descend down into ground effect when the rangefinder was too high to see the ground. Luckily, these rangefinders actually output a signal strength measurement, in addition to the distance reading. So Sebastian was able to use that to throw out the bad readings. Anyways, enough about the technical stuff. Let's go to the beach.
So today I brought the ground effect vehicle to the sea, and I'm gonna try and do an autonomous mission to a lighthouse that's on that peninsula way over there. This is kind of a risky thing to do because, as you can see, there's boats coming out of that marina right there. So I'm only gonna be in ground effect mode for a little while at the beginning, and then it's gonna go up to 20 meters and do the rest of the mission at 20 meters in altitude. So that should be a bit safer than staying super low where I could potentially hit a boat or a whale.
I planned my next mission over the bay in front of Seattle so that I could safely get some cool shots of the city without having to fly over anyone's head.
Look at that, just gorgeous.
Ironically, the water was smoother out here in the ocean than it was during any of the mornings out on Lake Washington. This helped a lot while staying in the ground effect. Ultimately, I think the altitude control loop can be improved quite a bit, and smoother water also helps a ton, so I'll probably revisit this airframe in the winter. Also, if you didn't see my last ground effects video, I would definitely recommend checking it out. We were able to capture some pretty incredible wingtip vortexes on camera. That's all for now. Don't forget to subscribe and be sure to check out the Think Flight YouTube channel as well. Thanks for watching, bye.